Hello, welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale. I am your host, Gabe, and this week we are diving into Prisoner of Azkaban Chapter 2, Aunt Marge's Big Mistake. So, let's get to the recap real quick. The chapter sees Harry heading downstairs to breakfast and seeing a news report on the television about an escaped prisoner. And for those of you who are new to Harry Potter and maybe following along with me throughout this podcast, that escaped prisoner is very important, and we'll see that in just another chapter or two. Anyway, as he and the Dursleys have their breakfast, Uncle Vernon mentions having to go collect his sister Marge, aka Aunt Marge, from the train station, and informs Harry that she will be staying for a week and that Harry, obviously, is to behave himself. In a desperate attempt to get his Hogsmeade permission form signed, Harry blackmails Uncle Vernon into signing it, to which Uncle Vernon agrees as long as Harry sticks to the story that Aunt Marge has been told, and that is that Harry has been attending St. Brutus's Secure Center for incurably criminal boys. That's a mouthful. Things go all right for the week with just a couple little mishaps until Aunt Marge's last evening at Privet Drive, when, after pushing Harry to the breaking point with her constant insults about his parents, Harry blows up his aunt. Quite literally. She inflates like a balloon, and the last we see, she's bobbing around on the ceiling as Harry collects his things, threatens Uncle Vernon on his way out, and leaves the house. So, this week I want to talk about something more recent when it comes to the course of my life, and that is specifically that I really want to leave the state of Michigan and not come back. While I am not currently engaged in any sort of power plays with my family, as Harry was during Aunt Marge's visit, given how my life has unfolded since we moved back here to Michigan in 2009, I certainly feel as if this state has become my prison and my mom's house here has become my prison cell. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. And I'm going to explain how this came to be. If we were in California, why the hell would we move back to Michigan? I ask myself that question daily. Anyway, we moved back here to Michigan from California in August of 2009. That decision having been made the previous year when my son and my mother and I had flown back here to Michigan to celebrate my grandmother's 80th birthday. She ended up having a stroke 2 days before we were to get on the plane to fly home. And thankfully, it was a minor stroke. I mean, the woman is 97 years old. She's still living independently. She hasn't been driving for a couple of years now. My mom and my brother help her out with that. And she does have somebody come in a couple times a week, I believe, to help clean and things like that. But for the most part, she's still fairly independent for her age and her health. And she's doing really well. But like I said, thankfully that stroke was minor, but it did change things for us moving forward by taking that eventuality and turning it into a certainty. And something that, we felt, being in California for so long, that there was going to come a time where we would have to move back here to help take care of my grandmother and my auntie, who is my grandmother's younger sister. So she's really my great aunt. But as close as those two are, or close as those two were, Auntie passed on actually a month after my trauma event in 2013. So 2013 was a shit year for me. Anyway, but she's always been Auntie to all of us. So once we got here, things were fairly normal for a while with, job hunting and getting settled into a new routine in a place that for those first few years, for me anyway, actually felt like home. Things had gotten to a point at that time where I was ready to leave California and hopefully reset some things for myself. And that worked out well. Like I said, for the first few years, it was the first 4-ish years between landing in 2009 and my trauma event in May of 2013. Naturally, for those of you who know my story at this point, everything crash landed hard for me on the day of my trauma event and the resulting PTSD that happened, that to this day still remains undiagnosed and therefore untreated. So, looking back, I struggled most during the first 2 years of my PTSD. I had reached out to 3 mental health providers and my own doctor, so 4 medical professionals essentially, in the 16-month period between trauma event and when I lost my job because of the PTSD in September of 2014. I talked more about that a couple episodes back, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details on that. We're going in a slightly different direction today. And as I mentioned previously about that, none of those 4 professionals, as they are called, I'm going to use finger quotes on that, did anything real for me. They just threw a prescription at me and ushered me out the door with PTSD. Ugh. My social circle at the time, it was my mother, my brother, and my so-called friends. Anyone who should have thrown a lifeline to me essentially ghosted me. Other than my mom and my brother, actually ghosted me. I literally have no friends at this point in my life. But again, I talked about that and the social isolation. Not going to dig into that too much. So I want you, if you haven't struggled with PTSD or struggled with any of the things that I have, I want you to imagine this for just a moment. I want you to imagine that you're drowning in some kind of a storm that you can't name. I'm sure you've all been in that position before, where life is just happening so hard that you feel like you're drowning and you're screaming for help, and then you're watching the people who should be helping you just swim away from you. Like they want nothing to do with it. And that is PTSD's sneak attack, really. It's isolating you from the exact support that your brain needs to rewire and to gain some sense of healing. I've been doing this on my own without the emotional support I needed for nearly 13 years. So coming up with a description like that was, on one hand, easy, but on the other hand, very difficult for me to come up with, to give you an idea of how this felt for me, if you can imagine. And when I consider the fact that I didn't feel, or I didn't realize that what I was dealing with was PTSD until I had gone back to school. It was specifically January of 2020 in my abnormal psych class where I figured that piece of the puzzle out. So 7 years from trauma event to realizing, oh, that's what that was. How the hell was I supposed to advocate for myself when the people around me who should have helped just didn't? They left. They left me hanging. I've mentioned a few times, the lack of emotional support of, my mom and my brother, and even my grandmother for a couple years, the first couple of years of that, when she was still living here before she went to her old lady apartment, as she calls it. Those are her words, not mine. nobody checked in on me to see if I was really okay when I was drowning, almost literally. So, yes, I'm still quite angry and frustrated that those around me who claimed to love me did not seem to notice just how much trouble I was in. So, hopefully throughout the course of this podcast and working our way through the entire Harry Potter series, I will be able to let go of some of that anger and frustration, because I know I've already mentioned it a lot, and I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but this is one of those aspects that I am currently not only living in as far as my circumstances, but I have a ways to go before I can get to the point where my finances start improving so that I can go get the therapy I need. So, let's talk about the night that I lost my job real quick. I mentioned in a previous episode it was because of the drug addiction that developed, which is a very common symptom for PTSD. And it also ended up being the spark that I needed to begin that very slow climb out of hell, basically. Granted, it took me 8 months, I think it was, to detox from that. So I credit my 2-year anniversary mark, May of 2015, as the moment I felt like a human being again from all of that, and beginning to work on getting out of rock bottom's incredibly large basement, in my case, metaphorically speaking. I therefore, like I said, consider May 2015 as the moment I began working hard to get back on my feet and rebuilding my life, which obviously is not what happened. However, I am still, nearly 13 years later, fighting just to get back on my feet. Socially isolated, even with my mother, my brother, and my adult son right here, watching me unravel, specifically my mom and my brother. My son was about 16 when this all started, 15, 16 when this all started. So I was not going to turn him into my therapist, and I wasn't going to dump a lot of this stuff on him, which is something my mother did to me, mostly after she and my dad split up and things were getting extremely difficult during that period of my life. I wasn't going to do that to my son, so he's automatically safe from any of my anger and frustration on that, because that was a choice I made as his mother. But, they're watching me unravel, but offering zero emotional backup, while my so-called friends ghosted me when the trauma hit. And I'm, in a way, I talked a couple episodes back about how things have been shifting for me in the last couple months, such that my mindset, my overall mood, all of those things have dramatically increased, and that the last 2 to 3 months are the best that I have felt in a very long time. Certainly the best I've felt since my trauma event originally in 2013. But I'm still on a certain level craving that one big break, that new door opening, and not just to recover from all of that, but to rebuild my life in a way that I envision. So that's what's been driving me this whole time, is it's got to break open. A door's got to open somewhere that will allow me to start rebuilding my life. And yes, you can have people in your life, such as I do, and still be socially isolated. I did a whole episode on that, on the difference between, forced social isolation, like what I experienced, versus embracing the social isolation, which I began doing toward the end of 2018. That's for a different episode because we can go into some really cool stuff with that. But that happens when you don't get the proper support in key areas of your life, is that social isolation. With things like emotional backup, financial help, whatever your nervous system screams for and whatever you need to get the proper healing that you need and to start rebuilding your life in whatever way you need to rebuild following a large long-term trauma like that. So that's a rough sketch of how I got from trauma event to where I am right now. But it has been in those more difficult moments over the last 2 to 3 years where this sense of being in the wrong place has really started to land for me. I do want to say that Michiganders are friendly enough people. They really are. But I have yet to meet anybody here, which is vastly different from my experience with making friends and creating a social network in the chunks of my life where I lived in California. I've yet to meet anybody here who has a modicum of emotional depth that I do. And I operate at a very, I'm willing to go deep and go into the shadows. Okay, that's how I have always existed. Where everybody around me here just feels like they're operating, surface level. And I don't say this out of ego. I really don't. Oh, I'm better than those people. It's just simply an aspect of my childhood trauma, mixing with my autism, mixing with my inherent personality, the nature part, the part I was born with, my genetic, and how my genetics are, playing out and activating and all that. The nearly 13 years of untreated PTSD on top of all that, and all of the moments where those who claim to love me throughout my entire life have let me down. Often in heavy moments when I needed the most help. Again, Michiganders are nice enough people, they really are. But because of my unique psychological makeup, I definitely feel like a square peg and attempting to fit into a round hole here. We'll sum it up that way. So, and moving back home to California, this is definitely my first big major goal, I believe. Some of you would argue that some of my other goals would be just as big, but this is top of the list as far as this is going to take some planning and some thought, even when things start finally turning around for me financially. That's the big one. I got to get home to California and be a California resident again. So, Harry's adventure after leaving Privet Drive was essentially, when you think about it, born of anger, frustration, and that deep soul level desire to just be free from all the toxicity around him, thus resulting in his acting rashly. I, however, acknowledge that I need to be intentional with the planning and the preparation and the execution of my plan, because essentially I am planning a cross-country move, and that's not something that I could do just saying, fuck you, I'm out of here, pack a bag, and I walk out the door. I don't have a car, I don't have money, I don't have a place to land, because there's no way in hell I'm going to go live with my California brother. I love my brothers. I'm definitely closer to Michigan brother. He's the baby of the family, but the middle child, California brother, is a bit of a doofus, and it would just, I'm better off here, actually. I'm just going to leave it at that. So, moving forward, as things begin to redirect in my life, I'll definitely keep you posted. That is definitely something I want to share, not simply out of my excitement that these new things are going to be happening, but in an effort to show. I can't just tell you. I want to show you that healing from trauma is possible, that getting back on your feet from a long period of survival, no matter what is driving that for you, is possible. And I'm just sitting here trying to think of, I guess I can encapsulate this by saying the real reason why I want to do that is because, as somebody who's autistic, being an empath is one of the gifts that I received in my autism goodie basket, if you will. And if I can help other people in any way, shape, or form, even if it's simply sharing my story and my experiences, I want to do that because I have had to find my own inspiration, my own motivation, my own, for lack of a better term, connection to other people through social media. And I have met some incredible people who have been incredibly vulnerable and shared some aspects of their life that over the years have helped me see that I am not alone in this. I might be alone in this in my current circumstances, but on the whole, I am not alone in this. I am not the only person struggling right now with all of this. So sharing our stories is extremely powerful. And that's why I'm here, is to share mine and hope it helps one of you out there. So, my apologies for a shorter episode, but I'm going to be honest with you. It feels like I've, encapsulated as much as I could in this episode without rehashing things that I've been discussing previously. I know that that is an issue for me as far as continuing to share my story, because some aspects of this will have to be revisited. And I get to a point where I hate sounding like a broken record. So, be patient with me. But a nice, short, sweet episode this week. As for Harry's adventures, we'll find out about those next week when we dive into Chapter 3, The Night Bus. Until then, please do take care that you don't accidentally magically inflate one of your relatives out of anger. The Ministry of Magic tends to frown on that. So, anyway, I'll see you next week.